A little-known federal agency is looking into the Surfside collapse. The National Institute of Standards and Technology will determine whether a full investigation into the disaster is necessary. It is a sub-agency of the Department of Commerce that also probed the fall of the Twin Towers after the 9/11 attacks. The agency is made up of experts who look into disasters that led or could have led to a, quote, substantial loss of life. No doubt the investigators will be looking closely at the 2018 report that has become the focus of so much attention. Joining me now is Kit Miyamoto. He is a structural engineer and the global CEO of Miyamoto International, a disaster management firm based in California. Kit, thank you for being here. I want to start with that 2018 paper showing structural damage in the building. What jumped out at you from that report?
Well, that's a nicely done report showing the pretty detailed investigation of what they observed, such as that the water leaks, such as the doesn't have the good slope on the deck, and also the deterioration of the concrete. They saw a lot of the rust, which means essentially the reinforced columns made of concrete has a reinforcement inside of it, and if there any moisture or any seawater or sea air intrusion, that will cause a rust. So that will actually rust itself expands, not only weaken the steel itself, but also spoil the concrete. That's what they saw out there.
So those items that you mentioned, the water leaks, the concrete cracking, the ability potentially for seawater and sea air to further corrode those structural elements, are those factors that likely contributed to this tremendous structural failure, or is it still too early to speculate?
I think it's very possible. I mean, essentially, what's going on here is the way that building's built is that those pillars or post or column, whatever you call, supporting the floors above. Concrete floors, very heavy one for 12 stories, right? So if this bottom lower columns, if there's compromise the capacity of it, if that is a fails, everything actually come down. So the failure or collapse you saw in the video is a very classic failure of the column failures. That's what you saw out there. And you notice this deck is a deck is not a ground. Actually, there's an underground parking, and underground parking is much bigger footprint than this tower itself. So compromising the deck itself by the water damage or reinforcement damage, whatever is going to happen to it, that will actually make the columns weaker because those columns is supported by that decks too. Without this, let's say the deck come off or deteriorate it become much longer, right? Slender. So that's actually really dangerous. That will cause the buckling effect of the column potentially. So yeah, I mean, no one knows exactly what happened to it, but looking through those reports, and there's some certain things happening, that's definitely need attention on that. By the way, the engineer start providing this actual remedy plans, which is 2021, just now, April. There's a plan showing it a very extensive way to how to actually mitigate these effects. So they are in the right course of action, but it was a little bit, too late, unfortunately.
Yeah. Are you surprised with your expertise that the mitigation plans came out in April of 2021 when the report of structural deficiencies illustrated these problems in 2018?
Well, 2018 structural deficiencies, they're talking about actually the flatness of a floor. It's very flat, so therefore water cannot just drain out easily. That's what they were actually talking about. But that can be addressed by the good waterproofing, by the way. And which they also pointed out that the waterproofing is the deteriorating, So if the combination of no waterproof and no slope on the deck, that's definitely to create the condition where the water could stay and deteriorate those steel reinforcement inside of the slab or columns. That's a really an issue. And by the way, the Miami-Dade County statute of this 40-year recertification is something that's considered best practice in the world, by the way. I have never seen anything like that anywhere. We don't have it here in California. They don't have it in Japan, nowhere. Just that's the only one county in the whole world actually enforced the rule. So I know that they understand certain issues that exist in corrosions, and they are really, I think that they are doing the best they could, but it's maybe 40 years just looking at this particular incident, maybe it's not long enough, but that's something that wait to see how it works out.
It's interesting, Kit, that you're saying that this is the best practice, that these are the best practices, and these are the highest standards really in the world, and yet we're looking at images of this tremendous collapse. I know, as I mentioned, that the National Institute of Standards and Technology is going to be looking into an investigation. I wonder how difficult is it to do an investigation, a proper investigation, when the building is in ruins? And how long does an investigation process like this take? And if the best standards are an evaluation every 40 years, how did things go so terribly wrong if this area is actually operating under the best standards?
Yeah, well, I mean, the process takes a while. It's essentially this essentially forensic approach. So looking at the reports, looking at the plans, there's existing plans available, and also there's a remedy plans which are published in 2021 available. And look at the video like that, you can see how the failure sequence was, right? You can see the middle section collapse first from a low. Just looking at it, you can tell from bottom columns failed first. So knowing the kind of location of the failures, understand the reports, and basically have to peel off those debris on top of it to get to where the failure is initiated. Now you can visually see what really happened to these columns, and that would be steps engineers would be taking it. So the forensic components are really critical, and it will take the many weeks, if it's a month, to really understand what really happened here. And but again, we all should put in perspective. This is a super rare condition, right? I mean, you don't see this ever. And just I think there's a probably sequence of failures from a design to maybe from the water to the waterproofing to the flooding in the basement. I think those sequence of those failures cause this kind of a major failure. Being an earthquake engineer, I seen our team and myself probably investigated over 500,000 damaged or collapsed buildings globally. In earthquake country, you see failure like this all the time, right? I mean, big earthquake happens and the buildings collapse.
Right.
And that's something that this failure was almost similar to what we see out there. But Miami don't have earthquake.
Kit, I think that's part of what is so disconcerting in some ways, that there isn't this expectation that something like this can happen, that the standards were high, that reviews were being conducted, and I think that's also led a lot of people to be concerned about potentially their own buildings. I was surprised to hear officials say that people living in the other part of the building, the tower that's still standing, could leave, but that they were not in fact evacuating it. What would you recommend? And should people living in similar nearby buildings be at all concerned?
Yeah, well, we've been asking exact same questions, after the major earthquake, in the country or cities we're in, right? But people have to live. But so here's the approach should be. I think if you see any deterioration, any rust, any cracks, stuff like that, you really want to have engineers to investigate what's going on. I think that's really important, and you will see it. You definitely see if anything drastic happen. You can visually see something going on in the building system. And if you don't see any cracks, no rust, chances are probably nothing's going on there. So it's very important to have the engineers to look through those buildings. If there's any rust, I think that's really important, or cracks. And maintenance. Maintenance is such a key component of it. If you maintain well, the buildings can stand forever. So I think that is such lessons, I think, from this, I do believe.
All right. Kit Miyamoto, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Lana.